This video is going to show you how to make a relief collagraph. A collagraph, which literally means glue print or collage print, is a plate made out of lots of different materials, could be used, but we're just going to stick with matte board and acrylic paint as the sealer. And you could make these plates to be printed in intaglio or printed like an etching. But what we're going to do today is we're going to make plates that we are going to print and roll up like a linocut or like a relief print. For this process, the material that I recommend is just good old matte board or illustration board. What I don't recommend is chipboard, which looks more like this. And the reason is that matte board has layers, and it's very easy to cut and peel away the layers on a piece of matte board. Not as easy to do that on chipboard, which is more like one layer that's been all glued together. Here's an example of a very simple relief collagraph. And what this is just a piece of matte board that I have drawn an image on and then cut with an X-Acto knife and peeled away different areas to different depths. Obviously, those that were carved away completely will print completely white. Ones that are more shallow are going to print with some of that low area showing, so you can get a tone. And then, of course, areas that aren't carved at all, you will get a solid of whatever color that you're printing. So that's what we're going to work on with this project. The size for my students that's required for you guys is 3 by 4 inches, which is small, but that's the size we've been working with this semester. This is 3 by 4. These are both 3 by 5. This one, I'm in the process of peeling away that lower layer and leaving these images in relief. On this block, I've printed it already, and this is what the print looks like. You can see the same kind of thing, that areas where I have carved away deeply or that they're small little shapes will print as white. Same with up here. I was hoping to get some of these lines of the window panes to show, but it's so deep on the block that I really wasn't able to get them to print very well. Because we were printing by hand, sometimes I was pushing the paper down in there, but I had to kind of give up on that and just let it print where it wanted to. Notice this tone that I'm getting here, which of course is this very shallow area of the plate right here. So what I want to see with these prints is I want to see that you have those 3 layers, carved away completely or deep enough that it prints white, carved shallowly enough that you get this tonal area, and then of course the uncut or uncarved is what I've been saying, area that will print solid. One thing that I think is very fun about working with matte board is that unlike linoleum or wood, it's very easy to carve it into different shapes. So it'd be very easy to modify and change from a rectangle, which so much of the work we make is in rectangles or squares, and make a much more free-form shape. This is fine with me as far as the project goes, as long as you're meeting that same pretty much, 3 by 4 inch minimum size. A lot of matte board comes with a textured kind of side, right, and a smooth side. For most prints, you want to use the smooth side, but you could use the more textured side. Some have, sort of a grid kind of texture, some are more subtle. That could also be the top side of your plate. Once we've finished carving, you want to seal these plates. And the reason we do this is so that they'll hold up for printing. You guys this semester are printing with Akua liquid pigments, but you could also be printing with oil-based inks to do this. Sealing them really well means a couple of, or more than a couple, 3 or 4 thin coats of either acrylic paint, gloss varnish, acrylic gloss varnish, or even shellac on the plates to get them sealed. You want to make sure that you're sealing all these low areas and all the sides along here and the back as well. and then you'll have a plate that will really hold up from printing. You can see though that with this one that I've started to work on, it's a much more raw kind of surface, and that sometimes as you're working on these, you might have sections of this that start to pull up and stuff. So you'd want to glue those down before you start sealing it with the paint. The paint also helps everything just seal together, not only be a little bit waterproof and more durable, but actually literally hold the thing together a little bit better. Transferring an image onto the plate would be just like you would do for a linoleum cut or any other relief print. And so as usual, here's my mock-up of my drawing, which I ended up carving and adding more details, but I just need this drawing to have the basic forms for myself and the composition mapped out. So as usual, I wrote print because this will be the print orientation. Obviously this is gonna flip like that when it's printed. And then I write plate on the other side just to remind me that that then should be the plate orientation. And you line it up, and you can rub, but I've found that there really isn't enough graphite on this other side to really transfer to the mat board. Unlike, say, lino or the Speedy Carve material, the mat board isn't all that absorbent. So I would recommend you know, old school, which would be you just make sure that you have graphite on both sides of your drawing, or the side that's down anyway. And then you would just line this up and redraw this, right? Transferring the image onto your plate. At that point, all you need to do to work on this is that you would cut around those forms. In this case, on this plate, I'm cutting out the forms to be white, and you just peel this off. And I just find that that is just so satisfying and fun to do. Really great. One of the attractions of Collagraph, to my mind, is that the cost of the materials is just almost nothing. Very inexpensive. You need an X-Acto knife. You need some sort of paint. I've been using this inexpensive Blick matte white acrylic. Optimally, you want a gloss varnish, but really any kind of paint from the Dollar Tree would be fine and work just great. We're using the acrylic property to hold it all together. Also, optimally, you'd want a white paint. It would just make it much easier to see the color when you ink up your plate, but it doesn't have to be. It could really be any sort of color at all. So the deeper you carve, I should say cut, the deeper you cut, the more you can peel away, and the lighter, of course, it will print. If you want to go really deeply, I would cut around it and peel one layer off, and then go in and cut again deeper. And then peel it off again, and you've made a deeper sort of spot. Another thing you could do is you could cut and just make some areas of a plate lower. Like with these, here I cut along here and I just remove this. So this part is deeper than this part. This part is deeper than this part. So you can have shapes within shapes, which is kind of fun. This is so shallow here that it will probably print with some texture, but then this will probably print white. Notice that these two plates are doing the two things you can do with relief printmaking. This one is like a black line lino cut. This one's like a white line one. The objects are white against a dark background. Here, the objects will be dark because this is the highest part of the plate. Then the lower part will print white. It won't print, or it might print a texture, depending how deep it is. So for you guys, for my students, what I want to see in your prints is I want to see that you're using black line, as well as nothing printing, and as well as texture. So I want to see all of those things, regardless if you're doing a full, squared rectangle sort of block, or whether you're going to do some sort of image like this. With a more intricate carving like this, I have gone over and repeated my carving along these edges because I want to make this deeper. And it's really important that you're trying to peel this back and not forcing it, because then you could have some of these areas that you wanted to stay attached to the board sort of flip up. If that happens, it's not a totally big deal because you could always glue them back down again. But any sort of intricate or involved cutting like this, just take it a little bit at a time. And just like, you know, any sort of relief cutting, there's always maybe some cleanup to do. So going back in here and, you know, cutting a little deeper so you get that nice crisp edge along your shapes, and just cleaning it up. So here's my original drawing, and you can see how I've started carving it. I've also gone in here and carved some away. I've also added details with little bits carved away and in here, similar to what I have drawn here, although I didn't have those here. With these, I have this form here, and then I'm just going to get rid of this little guy here. Probably have to do that a little deeper to clean it up. And then this form, I'm going to peel off and have it be like that. Once you have sealed your plate, even after you have printed the plate, you can still go back in and cut further on the block. We are working a subtractive method here, so we're taking the original surface of the mat board as the top of our plate. Once you have finished carving your plate, you would seal it. That really takes the most amount of time. I mean, yes, intricate cutting takes some time, but it's really the drying time of the paint that probably takes the most time. What I like about Collagraph is that you could work on this, you know, paint a layer on the one side, leave it, walk away, do something else, come back. So it's intermittent kind of time investment. Once you've completed your plate, you could still cut more away. So say you print a proof and you don't like something, you know, I mentioned this, I can go back in and cut away more, and then I could apply more paint on there. That's an advantage of us working with water-based inks, is that we don't have to worry about this not sticking to the plate. For my students, what you guys need to do with this project is you need to come out with a registration system. So you guys are printing on 5x6 paper. That's kind of been our standard paper this semester. And your print is your block is 3x4. So you need to figure out where would be the best place to print this. So since mine is a vertical form, I would probably have it about like this. So even margins here, here, and here. Sealing the boards is very straightforward, but I just want to say that you can use any kind of paint. We're basically using the acrylic as a sealant. The optimal thing, and what I usually use, is an acrylic gloss varnish, and that makes a very smooth, glossy finish. What I want you guys to do in this project is that I want you to minimize any brush strokes. I don't want you to use the acrylic to make you know, really large gloppy things, or playing around with letting it have a surface and a texture to it, because what I want you guys to be using is the shapes that you cut out. The texture that you will get, though, will be in the background. So I've already put one thin coat up here. You might be able to see in the light that it's a lot smoother here than it is down here, and that's because as you paint this, that background will tend to flatten out. It's all kind of being glued together by the acrylic. So this is pretty straightforward, but be sure that you're getting inside all those edges and along there. Much better to do a few thin coats for sure than a big heavy coat. So I'm using this Blick Matte White acrylic, and it has a pretty good body to it, so I am watering it down with a little bit of water so I can have hardly any brush strokes. Also, acrylic has a tendency to level out when it dries. That's just what it does. So it should work really well with this. You want also a soft brush that will help that along. And as I said earlier, be sure that you get all the edges and the back. This does not have to be nice and tidy on the back. I've used a much heavier amount of paint on the back just to make sure it's sealed. With these Collagraph plates, it really comes down to how many prints are you going to try to pull off one of these, and how are you going to print it. As I said before, I believe that if you were going to print this in Talio, that would be ink below the surface and hitting in all these low areas. Then I take the time to seal the plates a whole lot more than I would for relief. With relief printmaking, of course, the ink's just going to be on the top surface, and we just don't need as much to seal the board. Once you have done a few coats, I would wait, of course, whatever, 20, 30 minutes between coats and do more coats. I kind of rotate during the top and the sides and just kind of lean it up to dry. Once you've done all that, I would leave it at least overnight to really dry completely. You want this to be flat. Usually it'll bow. If it's wet on one side, it'll sort of bow, and then by the time you paint on the other side, it should flatten back out again. So that's how you do that. So the requirement is for one 3x4 plate that you print on the 5x6 paper. This plate is 3x5, so a little larger than what's required. When I printed it on the 5x6 paper, you can see that my margins are not optimal here at all. But for you guys, this would be fine. I want you to use the paper you have, and I'm assuming you have some leftover 5x6 paper prepped already, so it's okay. But that's definitely a little tight on the page. What would be better is printing on 5x7 paper, so I've prepped that so I can print some more, and it would look like this. Just a much better send-off for the page. So you can come up with that 3x4 inch equivalent different ways. I haven't printed these all together yet, but one idea was that I was doing this. This alone doesn't meet that 3x4 requirement, but if you have plates that are going to go together and make an image, this would meet that for sure. This is an example of what you're going to turn in for your project. A photo of your plate, a print in one color. Notice that with this one, I'm not really seeing that tonal printing. So you may want to turn in more like a print like this one, where see how the tonal areas are really working better in the print. And then you're going to hand color a print. Or you could do a print just colored in using a pencil. And I used a variety of drawing pencils that have different hardnesses to them. So some, when you draw with them, you get a much blacker kind of mark. And then others, like a 3H that I used, is a much harder lead, and you get a much lighter sort of gray. Or you could decide this is all done with colored pencils. What I would recommend for your hand coloring is that you stick with dry drawing materials. Things like pencils, Prismacolor pencils, or colored pencils of some kind. And even markers would be fine, but that you stay away from things like watercolor pencils or paint, because we're printing on washi, the paper's going to really buckle if you try to use that material. So if you have an idea and you want to use watercolor paint or something, I would do a test. If you paint very dry, right, with hardly any paint on your brush, you might be able to do that without compromising your craft and buckling the paper, but I would do a test first. So you just need to get one really perfect print, evenly printed like this. It does not have to be a blend, but you could do that if you wanted. And then you're going to want to print a few extra prints for yourself so you could choose the one or have a couple to practice on for your hand coloring. I have a lot of options here, which may be obvious by now. So notice on this one I decided to choose a dark print and color draw on it. This one I chose a very light print, which meant my drawing could be darker. So this kind of gave me more options. So print until you get your really good one color print, but then maybe you might want to try some really light ones, or try some that have different blends or other things going on, and these would be the ones that you would hand color. So you're not going to have to print a whole lot of pieces of paper to get the prints for this project, because you're only turning in one and then a hand colored one. So I have my registrations all made up for my little block. So I'm ready to go. Some other things that I do on here is that I had drawn a bunch of these 6x5 rectangles on paper, and then I just copied it on my printer, and then I could make multiple red sheets for myself. So if you're going to make multiple plates, you might want to think about doing that. Also on here, I did an arrow and wrote top, and I actually very loosely drew my image, because my measuring for this is I'm going to have a little bit of, oh, no, never mind. I thought I had done this with a little bit of a deeper bottom margin, but I could, when I place my plate, just ease it up, say 1/8 of an inch, just to give myself a little bit nicer of a deeper bottom margin on there. So I like to always put indication of where the top is for the block so I can be consistent. You're going to find that these plates are not as absorbent, and they don't hold on to the ink the way, say, the Speedy Carve block or Lino block does. And so you're going to need to do some kind of figuring out with them. You know, how does it print the best? You can see, because I cut away so much in the background, I'm getting kind of this nice halo around the whole image there. But also through the center, I'm getting some sort of random kind of marks, and maybe that's not really what I want. So I could just come in with a Q-tip and wipe that away a little bit. I found also with these, especially because I used matte acrylic to seal mine, that the ink has a tendency to dry pretty quickly on the plates, and so I need to over ink a little bit to compensate, and also print pretty quickly with these. So as a first print of this plate, let's see what I've got. Printing on the smooth side of the washi as usual, and it's just printing it like you would print a linoleum block or a Speedy Carve block. The difference is that chances are when you guys cut and peel away, you're going to have most of your cut areas printing white, depending on how you design. And so in order to get those low areas to print, you probably want to go in with your fingers and push the paper down into those areas so that they will print. Okay, so I like the way the tone in the background is working. I'm not really loving it right here. Maybe that's someplace I'm going to wipe it away, but I do like it around the rest of the print. So I would just keep going until I have my perfect print. Probably need a little bit more ink, do a few, it'll build up on the plate, and then I can get that really good print. So this wouldn't be the project, right, unless you combined it with other plates. But what we have coming up is a collage project. So if you wanted to make little Collagraph plates, or you're thinking about doing another sort of little project for yourself, or making, I don't know, business cards or something, it could be fun to make a little one like this, and then you could, you know, sort of type your name or something. They could be little business cards. I'm actually liking how that's looking. The way I did the arms, these were cut so they're lower, and the way it's just printing on the outside, I'm really liking that. So those other prints that I showed you that the paper just really wasn't large enough, I ended up just extending this, and I can now place my block here and have a little bit more than an inch at the bottom. I've eased it up just about a 1/16 of an inch, hardly a lot. and I'm printing on 5x7 for this. So if you want to do a larger plate, and there's a lot of advantages to doing a larger plate with Collagraph, because once you get really teeny, it's very hard to do the details. So working larger is always an option. Paper should be larger then. So if you have any questions about what paper size might be good, just think that you want to have at least 1-inch margins all around, but you can always contact me and I'll give you a measurement that would work with your plate size. You can see how it's starting to take ink in these shallow areas. And this is the main thing that you're going to have to do for a relief Collagraph, is I'm going to take the edge of my brayer and purposely, notice how it's now inking in the low areas, kind of turn it and push it on its edge so that this will purposely take ink in those areas. Once it's taken ink in there, the ink will have a tendency to want to stick to itself, and so it should take ink a little more readily in those areas once you've been printing. Another thing that I did on this plate is that you can see on this area I have this kind of circular form that sort of sticks out on the edge. I actually left the material of the plate underneath there. See how it's not cut there? So it supports, but it's deep enough that it won't print right there. So that can be a good strategy if you really want to cut very delicate areas away, or areas that, you know, end up being something that's really like a peninsula off to the side, and you're worried that you might, I don't know, knock that off of your plate or damage it somehow. Just leave like that last layer on the back of the mat board to hold it together. Also on some other plates that I did, I think this one in particular, when I was cutting through again to make this cut deeper, I went right through. So I just put a piece of masking tape on the back. That'll hold it together. So make sure, okay. I had put 2 different drawings together to make this image, and I truthfully, seems very dumb now, but until I printed it, I didn't realize that it looks very much like a stained glass window in a church, and that's part of why I colored it the way I did with all the bright colors there. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing down a little bit with my finger into those low areas so I get some of those tonal areas printing. Because if I'm just going over it with my spoon or the Baron, it's probably not going to hit down there. Okay. So it's a little light here. It's a little uneven, but not bad. But I do like how consistent and how even and good it looks with the low areas and the way they printed there. So you need to be kind of careful that you're keeping the bottom of this clean so this doesn't get all wet. An upgrade to this, and sometimes what I do, if you have a plastic like notebook sleeve, like you'd put a report in or something, you could always slip one of these into that, and then it could tape down on the table, and then you could wipe it off. But I'm not printing that many of each plate, and if I'm careful and if I get any ink on them, which I did with this, I just kind of hang it up along with the prints and it'll dry. So this is my house here, and I want to ink up and show you too, because this area here, we have a Craftsman, which I love. I had actually cut the plate so that my door was here. Why? I have no idea. It's pretty obvious that, to my mind anyway, that this is my porch and the door should go there. I had actually cut this whole little form with the little windows here. So once I realized that, I just cut it out, peeled it off, and moved it over here and stuck it over here. So these can be quite forgiving that way. The issue then, though, is even though I thought I was keeping it the same level, this is actually a little bit lower than the surrounding area. So if I just roll up that one section and show you, you can see how it's not inking up on the door right there. So I have to go in with the edge and kind of hard and get the ink down onto the door. This plate is also 3x5, and again, I have not terrible, but not great the way it hits on the piece of paper. It would be better if I had had that 5x7 piece of paper instead. Okay, so because that door is low, and because I've been trying to get the windows to print, I didn't push and try to get the ink in those this time. I definitely go in with my finger to print the door because otherwise just going over it with a spoon, even going like this, I don't really get the whole thing to print. So I find with these plates, even though they're very easy to make, they often don't print how you think, not in relief anyway. And so you might need to do a little bit of finessing when you do this inking. I also have areas up here where I carved into the textured areas, and they often don't print unless I push my finger down there. So I got my door to print, and also if you look here, like these are some, and here, there's shapes that I have carved deeper into the background area, so I have to often push to get those to print. That's it. Now to clean these, I would be really careful and not submerge them in water, definitely not. I also would just take a damp rag, sort of one that you've dried your hands on, is literally what I do. So it does have some water, but very little. And then just very gently work over the plate. I have added sometimes just a little bit of water, right? You can see how that re-wet the ink very easily. The thing is, you just don't want that water to sit on the plate for a long time. So just quickly wiping it, seeing if it needs to be cleaned there. It's okay. And then drying it off again quickly so that it's not getting saturated with the water. And then it's going to hold up for a pretty long time, because the action of the brayer is not very harsh for the surface, and because we're inking with the Aqua liquid pigment, not oil-based ink, there's not a whole lot of tack, and so that traction isn't wearing away the blocks. I just want to show you this one in particular because what I really love, I love everything having to do with Collagraph. I think you've gotten that already, but they get these beautiful stain on them from the ink once you've used them. And so as objects, they just are really lovely. So with this one, after I've printed it, I purposely cleaned it and left ink in some places and some, you know, not, like wiped more where the eyes are, because these as objects could be really great to keep as artwork also. Reworking the plates is completely possible. Originally this printed and looked like this, and then I cut lots more layers and then printed, and now it looks like this. With this plate, it originally printed and looked like the red at the top, and then I cut a lot more into it, and of course down here I've printed with a blend and it looks like this. So notice that I've changed the mouth. I also cut up through the nose area here. I was playing around with these, printed in different combinations, and originally I wanted these two plates to print together, and the earlier state of the blocks they printed together kind of looked like that, and then after I carved and switched which one was the key, made this one the key, they kind of printed like that, and okay, that was kind of fun. But I found what really kind of worked the best is I just decided to take this plate, print it the reverse, old printer's trick, right? And I did a couple versions of that. So printed the gray, which is just the back of the plate, a couple times, and then you might notice, and then printed the top, okay, of course, on top of it. So with this one, the holes are here at the top, and with this one, the holes are at the bottom, because I just wanted to see which way they might go together better. And I think they definitely go together here with the whites happening in the eyeballs. So the plates don't really work together very well, these two. I think they work much better as separate kind of plates. But it's fun that once you have the plates, you can really play around and do this. Again, this is not the project, but if you wanted to do a multi-plate, multi-color sort of print, you totally could do this. And if you add in, of course, blends to the mix, you could get all sorts of different things happening. I hope you have fun with this relief Collagraph project, and I hope you take advantage of the opportunity to literally move out of the box, move out of the square or the rectangle, and make shaped forms for your plates.